wrong. No, we haven't. Why? Because the policy was the correct policy. Did we succeed in slowing the rate of damage to the ozone layer? Yes. Why? Because environmentalists pressed hard to get governments to regulate big chemical companies to get rid of chlorofluorocarbons and move into HCFCs and HFCs. Who promulgated that policy in 1986? Sorry, go and do your history. Friends of the Earth launched that campaign in 1986, long before the Montreal Protocol. You've fallen into a bad ahistorical trap, matey, and it's a dangerous one. Actually, a lot of things are better in the world today because of environmental campaigns that have made them better and stopped the worst things happening. Please don't underestimate that and forget that, because it's really important. I'm much more perplexed about this difficult issue about, are the elites in the world today still intent on protecting their bastions of privilege and seeking to keep control over all of that for their own narrow interests at the expense of everyone else? I didn't really quite mean to put it as bluntly as that. That isn't actually my view of all politicians. I've met a lot of politicians over the last 35 years, and to characterize them all as part of some global elitist plot to keep the poor poor and not to enable people to improve their lives would, I think, be just a touch over the top, if you don't mind me saying. There are a very large number of politicians who are genuinely intent on trying to make sense of extremely complex, wicked issues, and to do so in the interests of society at large. And to characterize them all as being completely detached and inhumane about their view on human nature and on prospects for people, I don't go along with that. I genuinely don't go along with that. So yes, it made me nearly demented with frustration trying to work with the Labour government between 2000 and 2009. I can't tell you how frustrating it was, given that they largely had some of their heart more or less in the right place for a bit of the time. But even trying to extract the value from that was sort of incredibly difficult. So I don't think that's the right characterization. I'm talking about the economic elites in particular, rather than the political elites. Unfortunately, political elites have become too dependent on the economic elites and, of course, on the media elites. And I just recommend that you have a quick whiz around Noam Chomsky's amazing oeuvre, his amazing lifetime's work, because it was Noam Chomsky who in 1962 wrote the book Manufactured Consent, who basically predicted everything that was going to happen as we preferenced the interests of very small numbers of rich business elites that the politicians then became dependent on to maintain themselves in power via the intervention of the media. And that, if you look at the media empires out there in the world today, that unfortunately is quite close to what is happening today. So I genuinely don't think there's a clash there. And the fact that politicians are getting themselves more comfortable with the notion of sustainable wealth creation, I think is a good thing. It's very slow, very frustrating, and it certainly doesn't go to your point, telling point. Does that persuade them they need to change the economic paradigm? Even to bring forward alternative metrics to the way we measure economic success, improvements in well-being. Really, no. There is very little readiness on the part of politicians in the world today to start thinking through new paradigmatic approaches to understanding, measuring, and delivering prosperity. So even the concept of natural capital, which we've really been talking about a lot tonight, you still won't find that properly reflected in national accounts. National accounts are still based on throughput measures, on GDP-based measures, and even as we trash the natural capital on which some of that GDP is based, you don't have a capital account that tells you the balance between what you're doing through GDP and what you're doing to your natural capital assets. So there's been a working party going on in the UN for 32 years, looking at alternatives to GDP as a way of measuring prosperity in the world today. 32 years. Fantastic. Fantastic. I have wrapped up. 32 years is more than enough.
That's a good punchline. Okay.
Well, I'll do what Jonathon did to me. I do agree with him on one thing, that the kind of orthodoxy is completely mainstream, and the Green Party is a very small part of it, and it is completely mainstream. But I disagree with pretty much everything else. I mean, even in relation to what it has said about, the implication that there's some kind of free market orthodoxy out there, and these green ideas are not being taken up. It's absolute, complete nonsense. I mean, someone asked about Herman Daly. Herman Daly used to be seen as a kind of maverick economist. But recently, for example, the President of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, he sponsored a blue ribbon report, including Nobel Prize-winning economists like Joseph Stiglitz and Amartya Sen. And they came to similar conclusions to Daly, and talked about natural capital and indexes of well-being and all this kind of stuff. And this is sponsored by the President of France. There was a slightly low-rent version of that in Britain, Tim Jackson's Prosperity Without Growth, which started life as a Sustainable Development Commission report in Britain. And if you look now, all of these organisations, like the OECD, UN, IMF, America as well, they're very much talking about changing their national accounts to reflect these green ideas, but I would say that's not really a positive move at all. For example, in relation to GDP, GDP is far from a perfect index of well-being, but in many respects it underestimates the benefits of growth. For example, what I mentioned before in relation to the quality of growth in terms of things that didn't exist in the 19th century or in the 1970s but exist today, that isn't incorporated into GDP. I make a very strong argument that GDP actually underestimates the benefits of growth. That's certainly what I would argue. And it's the politicians, the media, and the business class are, on the whole, very much pushing this sustainability, growth, environmental agenda, whether you like it or not. That is the case, including very rich businessmen. Prince Charles, all right, he had a few problems, he recently had to be bailed out by Waitrose, but basically a very rich guy. But also people like Richard Branson, Al Gore. We shouldn't forget Al Gore, inconvenient truth, Al Gore is a billionaire hedge fund manager. George Soros, another financier. A lot of these people are actually pretty much into green, sustainable kind of ideas. So whether you agree with those ideas or disagree with those ideas, to argue that they're not mainstream, and in fact Jonathon argued before when he started his speech over the orthodoxy, I think is nonsense. Just to say something about climate change. Now, I would accept that the climate is changing. I think that's pretty clear. I would accept that human activity has played a significant role in that. I would accept we need to do something about it. But even accepting all that, what we do, how we respond, is not a scientific question. There is a political question. Politically, what is the best response? That's a political debate. Jonathon can caricature it as personal bickering. I would say it's a political debate. And if you look at the mainstream response to climate change, which is the one the governments are pursuing, even in its own terms, it is really totally useless in dealing with climate change. Because what the government really emphasises, and the media really emphasises, is essentially lifestyle change, behaviour modification. It's all about don't leave your tap running when you're brushing your teeth, don't leave your TV on standby, all of these kind of things. It's about driving the car less. It's about kind of obsessing with yourself as an individual. Recently, the government announced cuts in what you might call green technology, which could be technology that would try to deal with this problem, and it hardly created any kind of fuss at all. Because although the government might pay lip service to forms of technology, the overwhelming emphasis in relation to climate change, in relation to the orthodoxy, is telling people to consume less and to be self-obsessed in terms of how they use energy and so on. And that, even in relation to dealing with the problem of climate change, is completely useless. I say, from a different political perspective, that the way to deal with it is to not treat it as a individual moral question, to treat it as a practical engineering question, and to tackle it in that way. So to decarbonise the energy supply, to adapt to climate change, for example, by building higher seawalls. I'm sure there's also some room for high technology solutions. For example, sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, that might be one solution. And one final thing in relation to this, we need a hell of a lot more energy in the world. That's really left out of this discussion. If we're going to make everyone in the world as rich as we are, which I think we should certainly aspire to, we can't do it with less energy. Globally, we need massively more energy than we have. We can't do it with less, we need more if we're really going to make the world rich.
Okay.